Thanks for joining our webinar on Safe versus Scrum. I'm here with Laurens Bonnema, and he's in the other corner. I'm Sjoerd Nijland. Before we start, I want to share an important note about why we're here today. We're here with respect for each other, for the game, for Scrum, for Safe. And I also feel that it's worth sharing that we're here for thoughtful debate, to learn from each other, to share experiences. But we've both had also some negative backlash, I would say, on social, right? We've been, I would say, accused of being here to bash Safe, or that we're just here to fill our pockets.
I'm definitely not here to bash Safe, because I'm here to defend it, just so you know. But not defend it because I think it needs defending, but to point out that most of the things that are being said about it may be more nuanced than we sometimes think. And that zooming in on the differences may not be as helpful as we sometimes seem to think if you look at LinkedIn. However, this is supposed to be a debate, so we are going to go head to head with maybe some pretty strong language and also some very opinionated things, because that's part of the fun of a debate, right? So definitely that, but preferably not a lot of attacks back and forth. Mostly talking about the things that are more, well, how would you put it? About the actual knowledge of the frameworks that we're talking about and about the actual details. That said, back to you, Sjoerd.
Yeah, so we can kick it off, I think, with already a very juicy subject, and this is mostly kind of to frame the whole conversation for today, because it's not going to be a conversation about which is better for enterprise Scrum, regular Scrum versus Safe, right? That's not the frame, but we framed it as such. So what are the curious topics that provoke some of the heated debates that we've observed online, that are particularly noted by Scrum practitioners?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to take item number 0 indeed off the table, the Scrum, or regular Scrum as we called it, because we wanted to define it like Scrum according to the Scrum Guide versus Safe. Both are suited for enterprise applications, and even though some people seem not to think that way, even Safe agrees that that's the case. So there is really not a big issue there. It's just whatever solves most of your problems, that's what you end up experimenting with. So the other topics that we're going to cover is software factories and normalized story points and committing to output as opposed to outcome. And what even are stories and how should you use them, which interestingly is officially not a Scrum subject. And then the PO, if they really own a project, product. My apologies, never ever say project, of course. And then how long is an MVP, but also emergent design at scale. I think those were the 7 topics we agreed on because they caught your eye, right? When you read the Safe framework, because ladies and gentlemen, the gentleman next to me has actually read the website. And I mean, that almost is worth an applause, because it's a big honking framework, right?
Yeah, not just that, we've had the training materials, but also talked to, I would say, over 100 Safe practitioners. I've had some experience myself. All in all, been very much up to date, and I think one of the great reasons of being here with you today is that you're a Safe trainer and a professional Scrum trainer.
Yes,
and that's I first thought, like, are you a unicorn?
No, there's at least one other that I know of. My dear friend Yuval Yeret, he's an awesome professional Scrum trainer and also a really, really good Safe practice consultant trainer, which I'm not, by the way. I'm a Safe practice consultant. So just a tad lower than that. But let's really pick it up with the software factories thing, right? Because that was the first thing that we had a debate around. And just so you know, Sjoerd and I, we tend to have heated debates where he usually is like, yeah, the Safe thing that you're pushing it's not good. And I then tend to be a bit annoyed by that because it's what I do all day. So we have strong differences of opinion, and I actually kind of like that. So let's start on the software factories. Why
let's bring it up. Let's kick off that first round. So software factories are back. That's actually the point zero, which we talked about. Is on screen right now. It's the enterprise in Scrum. So we just talked about earlier. It's like Scrum is small and lightweight. How can it be suitable for enterprise? So in that we refer to, you already mentioned Scrum is fit for enterprise. The enterprise in Scrum. Covered it way before Safe emerged and Safe. Scrum has its roots in enterprise. I think we're all agreeing on that, so we don't need to debate that. But the next one, software factory. Thank you. Keeping pace requires a new delivery system. Software factories. That to me was like, what am I reading here? Is that true? Then I studied the concept of software factories a bit deeper, and I found out that it's actually there way before I was born. The whole concept of software factories was born, and after I studied that, I went back to SAFe and then studied what SAFe has to say about software factories, and they had something completely different in mind when they used the term software factories. In fact, they used it to describe, let's say, a bundle of tooling, a bundle of, let's say, integration, software tooling, that you can use out of the box throughout to streamline, streamline the entire organization.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but what's the problem, right?
So first of all, I think, good point. What's the problem? Software factory, to me, it comes from like manufacturing, mass production. Yeah. We don't mass produce software. If you create an app, you generally create one of them. You're not going to reproduce 100,000 versions of that same app. Well, second, I don't consider, like, if you're a developer, it kind of hurts that you're kind of being described as a software factory line worker. Yeah. And I don't think it's produced in that kind of sense. Yeah, so it has a sentiment to it as well. And I think we've come away from that kind of thinking, right? We moved away from that.
Yeah. Well, it may be a bad start to this, but I do have to concede that software factories is not like the best metaphor ever. It is taken from work by Peter Vollmer, and he did an awesome article on the SAFe website on software factories. I personally don't like the notion, and that's because of the idea of factory work versus software work being significantly different. However, in SAFe's defense, I do have to say here that the intent behind this is, of course, not the old school, messy, let's beat people into submission kind of factory that people somehow seem to conjure up when they think of a factory nowadays. I'm talking about a modern factory, right? So one that you would walk in now. Those are clean, people are mostly happy, and several years of lean thinking have gone into creating workspaces that I think some programmers would love. And even though personally, because I'm conceding this point just straight out of the bat, I don't think the metaphor is good, but the association we have with factories
why should we use
that.
Then, right?
I think we should move to studios, and then I can immediately hear a whole earth swell of people starting to type in LinkedIn, yeah, but do you know what happens in software studios? Like the practices they do there and how badly they treat some of their programmers. So the key thing here is if you do it with respect for people, honestly, it doesn't really matter if it's in a factory or in a studio. But in all honesty, I much prefer the studio metaphor for software development because that at least signals that it's creative endeavor that we're talking about.
Yeah. So again, it's a little bit obscure because understanding what software factories are is a bit tricky already because SAFe has introduced kind of a new definition for it, like this bundle of software, saying, well, it makes it easier for everybody to use this out-of-the-box software. It gets you set up quickly. It prevents some of the kind of costs and all the thinking that has to go into it. But on the other hand, you could say, well, isn't that the beauty of it, that people can self-manage their own solutions and designs?
To be completely honest, when I was a programmer, I always used my own tools, right? So true artisans, they may use the toolkit provided by the organization, but they will never only use that. It's not even. But
this is the big fear of
tip of the spear. First tier Navy SEALs do that, right? They go in, and they have their own gun. And even though there isn't an officially sanctioned issued one, they have their own settings for everything. That's what actual professionals do. And that's also why I indeed prefer the studio metaphor over the factory metaphor. So let's talk something real. Let's talk story points. I mean, talking about heated debates. And for anybody now already getting angry, story points are not a part of Scrum. We know this, but they're used a lot. And apparently, you have something to complain about the way that SAFe uses story points.
There's, I have a point to address here, indeed. There we go. Normalized story points. So there's story points and there's normalized story points. And this, again, I understand where how this emerged, right? So, and you can maybe help me with the context for this, but so it's kind of an agreed starting baseline that is often used to make it, and SAFe describes it, this literal quote from SAFe is, in this way, story points are somewhat comparable across teams, so that management can better understand the costs for a story point and more accurately determine the cost of an upcoming feature. So in effect, if you then they describe it, basically 1 point is a day.
Yes.
And
just
what
like
it boils down to,
just
right?
like James Grenning did in the original article when he introduced story points, right? So
exactly. So
some people, including I think Ron, seem to think that was Ron Jeffries, and he was definitely involved. But if I remember correctly, the first time I read about this was in a paper by James Grenning. And he wrote, indeed, about the normalized story points. He didn't call them that way. He just had it about like a single person day of development that was going to be a point. And then wouldn't it be awesome if you estimated everything in those days as opposed to hours, because that would have been better. Now, the example that you gave is a little bit out of context. If you can read that into it if you read it. But when I read it with the way that I look at those texts, the context here is, if a team has no history, if they do not agree yet on how to estimate things, then, and if they're stuck, this is really important, if they're stuck talking about the estimation all the time, as opposed to just giving, how do you call it, what's a better name for an estimate? If they give a forecast, based on the items that they feel they need to do. And they look at how many can we do, and that's what they're using some form of estimation for. If they keep talking about the size of the estimate instead of getting to the forecasting part of the discussion, then and only then is when I would introduce normalized story points. Like, let's get over the hump. Let's treat this as one day, and then see where you end up. And that's after I would have tried just saying, what's the smallest item on the list, and doing story points as they were really designed after that article that I just referenced.
I guess it's like an entry, but it's also like, why not just call it days? Why do we have to obscure it with this language? Doesn't it make it more like Agile mumbo jumbo? Like we call it story points now it's Agile. Woo.
That's because that's where story points started. In all honesty, I do not even promote the use of story points because I'm all in on the no estimates movement. But when you do use story points and you find a team stuck in a rut, not agreeing on what a point is, this is a nice way to start. In the official guidance that SAFe provides, it says clearly, you only do that once. You never look back. Then from that moment forward, you use real data, so actual points. And the only thing, and I kind of, it's nasty to have to say that I do agree a little bit with you on there. It's definitely never meant for management to compare and contrast teams one against the other. That's where I would say that's exactly where normalized story points can and will go wrong. So you should never use it for that.
Yeah, and I think that's not the purpose of it, right? So, and it just kind of to read it like, okay, then it's easy. Of course, understand it's easier for management, and that they will value it that way. But that's not why we should be, why the story points can be useful.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and that's and again, you don't have to use normalized story points, right? So this is. It's not mandated.
No, it's not mandated. No. It's only when you're doing it for the first time.
Yeah.
Not even story points are mandated, by the way. So it's just a suggestion. It's something you can use, not something you have to use.
Yeah, but that said, I've also spoken with developers who say, well, it's not mandated in SAFe, but we have to do it this way.
Yeah, and then I would immediately ask, who's telling you that?
Well, it's actual developers from
No,
this
no.
actual.
I would ask
Yeah.
those developers, who is telling you to do that?
Oh, exactly.
And
Yeah.
why are you accepting that they mess with the way that you do your job? Because Scrum and SAFe are meant to empower teams, not to disempower them. And one of the key things in empowerment is, as a developer, you decide how you do your job. If you don't need story points, don't estimate them. They're only a tool for the team.
Yeah. So Scrum basically only has one condition for a size, right? It's either does it fit in the sprint or not, and
Yes.
whatever else you want to size or use, it's up to you, right? You can add on to it, but at its baseline, it's very simple. Do we believe we can do it this sprint or not?
I'm so happy we agree on that, but more on that later, because you now conceded point 4. But let's move to point 3 first.
Did I concede already?
Yes.
All right.
So commitment to output. Next round. The story rather than an outcome.
A story rather than an outcome. Yeah, why are we committing to individual stories
Are we?
in SAFe? Yeah, that's what I believe I read in SAFe, right? We have some quotes put up.
Do we
here.
have that up on the slide?
Yeah,
Yeah.
V5
I do see
versus V6. We do see a change. We
in my defense, indeed, between version 5 and 6, they do seem to have evolved a little.
yeah.
And I think it's a good catch. The description on the website used to suggest that quite clearly.
Yeah.
But now, arguably in the new version of SAFe, it suggests that significantly less. So that would be good.
It's still there though. It's commits to a maximum of 36 story points. It's kind of like cringe for me. It's a little bit.
I can see
how
how
use it as an example.
I can see how you would say that. However, if you closely inspect the language, if you read the whole page, then the first paragraph of the article that you mentioned clearly states that teams commit to iteration goals, not to stories.
Yeah.
So I do think it can be improved even further than it has already, but the way it's meant, the intent behind this is clearly committing to goals. And some of the examples given may put you on the wrong track. I do agree with that, but it's really quite clearly already in the first paragraph, you commit to the goal, never to the list, because otherwise you just commit to being really busy, and that's never the purpose. Right? The purpose is to actually achieve an outcome. And I honestly don't really think that SAFe and Scrum, according to the Scrum Guide, are completely at odds there, except, of course, that SAFe calls that a story, where Scrum calls that a product backlog item to make clear that.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that point. I believe that there's one more thing. Like, what does commitment mean then? So so commitment in Scrum is you're committing to supporting each other achieve your goals, right? That's how it's kind of phrased in Scrum. So what does it mean to commit in your own words? Or would that definition also apply in SAFe, would you say?
That definition also applies in SAFe, because as I just mentioned, the team commits to iteration goals.
Yeah.
But it says goals there, not goal. So that could be maybe sharpened up a little. But you commit to the goal, never to just the list that you created to reach that goal. So you have that list so that it is an indication, if we do this, we think we'll get that outcome. But you commit to the outcome, never to the plan to get there. Yeah,
or even the individual tasks or the number of points. So I'm glad that you cleared that up a little bit. And we see this shifting in SAFe as well. And the same shift happened within Scrum, by the way. So the older days, commitment was also attributed to you're committing something to the backlog. As you know, as a programmer, you may be committing your code to a code base.
Even there,
right?
that was indeed that distinction, because I can't remember that in Scrum you ever really committed to the list. You always committed to achieving an outcome.
Yeah.
But that can be made more clear, and I think both frameworks are making that more clear in every incarnation.
Why does this matter? Why?
Well, I do think it matters. The debate is also really valid, because if you commit to getting the list done, you essentially, if you're not careful, you commit to not think, right? So this is my to-do list. I'm going to work through that to-do list, regardless if that to-do list actually ends up getting me that goal.
Yeah.
So it should always be with a strong focus on the goal, never with just the focus on the list. The list is just there as an initial path towards the goal, and it's comparable to any other journey, right? If we decide to go walk to the center of Hilversum, which is where we are, and there is a roadblock, and we then decide to just stay at the roadblock because the plan said we were going there,
Yeah.
instead of going around it, then that's just stupid. So obviously, you commit to where you're headed, not to how you think you're getting there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can imagine a lot of developers maybe listening in and thinking, well, it should be like that. Unfortunately, that's of course not what everyone's experiencing.
Yes.
Yeah, the same in Scrum, right? It's not.
Yeah, and
there's there's still work to do there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there I would indeed say, I don't think that that's a failure of the frameworks. I think that that's regular, normal human failure. We read the framework, we think we've read something, and it's meant obviously in a certain way, and then we go and do it differently.
Well, to challenge you on that a little bit, because if you see the language used in SAFe before, and same, I would say in early versions of Scrum, you can read how commitment is applied to, again, the task stories.
And there,
predictability, streamline management.
I completely disagree with you, because in that very first paragraph, it clearly states, teams commit to iteration goals.
Yes. In addition, then also what it says in walkthrough of all the committed stories, demo the stories to which we've committed. Those are SAFe quotes, right? Those are same quotes.
I have no active recollection of that, but,
but they're on screen. And,
that may indeed say it.
It's not me bashing SAFe, by the way. That's just SAFe.
That's unfortunate. It's not how I teach it, though.
No.
I do think that the fact that it does say exactly what it should say in terms of committing to goals, that's good. And let's move on, because
to stories. What are
technical points? So what are stories?
Stories. Tell me a story.
Yeah.
As a database, I would like to be queried so that.
Yes. Yeah. That's the enabler story.
Yeah.
Because SAFe distinguishes between two types of stories. You have user stories, and those are short descriptions of a small piece of desired functionality that is written from the user's perspective. That's the regular definition of a user story. And this is important, that can be completed in a few days or less.
You mentioned, I do want to tap into written from a user's perspective, but aren't they also designed to have have a conversation by and with user? And I think that's often what's missing, right, is a story user.
Yeah, stories are, of
conversation.
Course, stories are, of course, meant to be told, not written, because that's why they're called stories, right?
Yes.
But the key thing, the way it's defined in SAFe, I actually kind of like, because it's close to the original definition. It's short, it's small, it's user-centric, because if it's a user story, and you can get it done in a couple of days or less, which is exactly the kind of size I prefer, because then I don't have to do real estimates. The thing that can confuse you, and that's also clear from the example that you gave, is that in SAFe, you differentiate between user stories and you have also enabler stories. And enabler stories are a little bit more technical, and that's where you get the stupid phrase as a database I would never actually promote using the user story template for such an enabler story. I would write that down as the technical story it is.
Exactly. But to be clear, I don't confuse them. I think stories, as SAFe uses user stories, enabler stories. So stories, as SAFe defines it, is detailed implementation work. That's their own definition of a story. Yeah,
right? That's true. And then that you feel as a team that you can do in a couple of days or less. Yeah.
Yes. So how is that different, like detailed implementation work? To me, it also sounds a bit like, again, a terminology hack for just, again, items, task, or whatnot. We call it story now because it sounds sexier. It sounds a bit like user stories, but they're not. And now we can take the user out of the story.
The idea here
is we're anthropomorphizing, just to finish my thought, we're anthropomorphizing things like in a ridiculous way. We're misapplying a pattern, or maybe misapplying it, if you will. It could be a creative pattern, by the way, as well. But anthropomorphizing, like as we're making them sound human. As if they have a want or a need, these functional components, is to make it, and people, sometimes it feels ridiculous
before I dive in on that, let me just quickly do this. If you have a question, make sure you put it in the Q&A section so that at the end we can answer all those questions. I have to say we are filtering them because we're not going into like a bashing debate, but what we are going to address is any and all questions that you have about SAFe versus Scrum, and opinions are welcome there. But let's get back to the thing you just mentioned. The phrasing using a user story template of what is in essence a more technical thing, a more technical maybe, well, you could call it a task, but the key thing there is actually to not make it a task, but a result that you want to get. I would never use the user story template for that, because that to me doesn't make sense. The database does not have a soul. But the key thing is...
Who knows in the future, right?
Yeah, next month they will probably have needs and tell you that they need coffee. They need coffee too. But we've still a couple of weeks to go in AI development, so we're still safe. Yeah, pun intended there. Key thing though is I honestly, I don't truly see the problem with the way that SAFe defines that, other than some maybe not too helpful examples that are provided in terms of using the template.
I think it's just like I said, it requires this explanation. Otherwise, it's kind of confusing. And if we use I feel like we're using these terms because maybe more general terms like task are falling out of fashion, right? And then we're kind of like making like I think it's again a bit mumbo jumbo.
But isn't that the whole point of stories, right? Stories.
We change the label. We don't have to change our behavior.
Stories are meant to be told, not written. And that's because if you just write them, they're open to interpretation. They're very hard to write down correctly. So that talking about the story, that's the whole point of the story. Yeah. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue to, let's say somebody wrote that humanized database story. Yeah. And somebody else thinks, I have to laugh about this. I can't take this seriously. Databases are not alive. And then somebody can explain, yeah, this is why I wrote it down that way anyway. And that can be out of somebody gave me the template, right? That's probably the real reason. And that in and of itself is a worthwhile discussion. When are we going to write it down as if it's a human need that we're covering? And when are we going to write it down as a more like a technical spec kind of thing? What kind of technical result do we want? And that discussion is actually why I honestly don't think it's wrong to use the template incorrectly every now and then, because you'll end up having that discussion as a team.
Yeah, and of course you have to, apply it when it makes sense, right? And there's still, you have to think about what kind of way does phrasing this particular need, requirement, specification, whatever way makes best sense for that particular application. You want to leave it up to the developer. You don't want to force developers to use a single way of phrasing and formulating requirements or needs or everything I just mentioned. And I feel like labeling everything as a story is kind of still obscuring the whole thing. And it's kind of also like, okay, we don't want to call it functional requirements anymore, or functional specs or technical specs, because that reminds us of the old waterfall days maybe. So for me, I think it's still a bit bizarre. The language is still a bit obscure.
The reasoning behind there is that in SAFe, we use a four-pronged taxonomy, where at the top level you define something as an epic, and then you have a capability, and then you have a feature, and then you have a story. And all those four levels are actually levels of refinement, right? So at the lowest level of refinement, you call it a story.
At what point are developers involved?
At the whole, throughout the whole thing.
Yes, please let that be the case, right?
Yes, so the bell signals that we're up for the next part of the debate.
Yes, ooh. It's one of our favorites, right?
Well, it's not mine.
It's the product owner, really the owner of the product.
Well, that's why it's called the product owner, right?
Well, we hope so. We hope that the name, lives up to its own definition and meaning, right?
What's your issue?
Well, I don't think I'm the only one with this particular issue. It is, I think once again, to me, when I really go into it and actually get into the gist of it and really split all the hairs when it comes to this particular accountability, I find it's just another facade. It's another, okay, we've got the label, but if you look at what we actually do, I would say, factually, it comes much closer to, let's say, team management than I would say product ownership. And often we could say, do we actually have that ownership of a product? What does ownership mean? And when I discuss this in practice with people in the same kind of position. Like a lot of product owners I talk to say, well, I don't feel this sense of ownership. I don't have this sense of ownership. And I'm not respected in the decisions I make about the product.
Yeah.
So more of the proxy pattern. It's kind of challenging for them that they feel that their own name is a facade, is false, and they're not respected in that regard.
Yeah, it's actually why Scrum keeps calling product owners at that team level you describe product owners, because the intent there is for them to truly own their part of the product, right? In a skilled context, product ownership can mean that you own part of the bigger product, but the part that you own, you're still supposed to own, right? You are supposed to be more than a business analyst on the team making some definitions. So that's why
so
SAFe
you're supposed to be more of a business analyst.
A product owner.
Yeah.
The idea there being that what SAFe did not want to do is introduce by name the pattern of the chief product owner and the product owner by proxy, which used to be a thing, right, like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Nobody really liked that, and SAFe by design wanted to get that out. No, product ownership should be product ownership, but then if you do it at scale, what happens a lot, even though the Scrum Guide does clearly state it cannot be a committee, is it becomes a committee anyway. And the trouble with a committee is they can keep talking for hours on end and never reach an agreement. So the classic solution to fix that is to introduce a primus inter pares in that group of product owners who will then, if we don't agree, I'll make a decision.
Yeah, so that's kind of like, will the real product owner please stand up?
Yeah, and I would argue...
Because you have, you mentioned, like, okay, you're product owner, and that's already tweaking the definition, right? No, sub-product or partly product owner, right? So, and then we're saying, okay, well, it's more like business analyst, right? So in that, we're already starting to warp...
But that's not what I said.
We get that from SAFe, right? That's my interpretation.
I have to intervene here because now you're changing what I said. I did not say you're mostly a business analyst there. I said exactly the opposite. What I said was that you should not become just a business analyst on the team and then call that a product owner.
We agree on that.
It is, the key thing there is, and in a skilled context, in my opinion and in the opinion of SAFe,
okay, but then I want to say it's my opinion, right? Not yours, but my opinion.
That it is a product, that the product that you own is part of a bigger product. And managing that bigger product, that can be the responsibility of the product management function.
Yes.
Which in a very real sense in SAFe is supposed to be the group of product owners that amongst themselves have selected a primus inter pares who does de-stalemating, right? So when that group becomes the committee that everybody dreads, which is why in the Scrum Guide they said it should never be a committee because then you get that endless debate. To avoid endless debate, you have
accountability.
One of the product owners who then takes a decision if we are stuck. And in a very real sense, if it gets bigger, if the product that you're working on gets bigger and needs to be, and this is an important one, if it needs to be worked on by large numbers of people, which in all honesty, I think a lot of organizations would do well to rethink if they truly need to have 10 teams work on a product, if they can get away with just 3. But let's say that they found out it really is necessary and they're working on this with 10, maybe 20 teams. And for those 20 teams, only one product owner for the big honking product seems to be a rather difficult mission.
So that's a challenge.
In the product management community, there is already for years a clamoring to take product management rather more seriously. And that means that if it's really a big complex product that you're designing and developing and creating with these teams, then it's probably also a good idea to stratify that just a little bit. And that just a little bit is an important assumption. Yes, I do agree that you see that go wrong all the time, but that does not mean that that's the intent of the framework that we're talking about. Yeah. The intent of the framework is to create true product ownership. Also at the what they call Agile release train level, which is where you create a team of teams and they create one cohesive product. But that consists of several smaller products. That's what they are creating. And those smaller products are managed by product owners in SAFe, and the
Well-
overarching product is managed by the product management function. That's what it's called.
It looks like to me, just to kind of connect into that, because I hear what you're saying. I would agree fully with that. If it were not that I also see like, okay, what they're managing, team backlog, and there's often a subcomponent to that, and it's often already somewhat watered down set of requirements. Bell, dang it. But something that I feel could require a bit more clarity, and you would, I think, agree. That it's not very clear that ownership, what way that ownership is represented.
I think this is a nice one, because to win this round, I selected a nice quote, literally taken from the Skilled Agile website. Today, each product owner represents the needs of customers and the business within a particular solution domain, typically co-represented by a product manager. So it's in that order. So as a product owner, co-represented by a product manager. So the product manager also joins, but it's the product owner first. Now that
and the picture says something else. It says a big product management on top of the.
Yeah, and that's because we're used to reading pictures like that, and I do agree.
Well, it's their picture, right?
I do agree that this is a very subtle one. It's extremely subtle, I have to admit.
That's what we're here to clear this up, right?
It says in the picture, it says product management, not product manager.
Yes.
And as stupid as it may sound, that's actually an important distinction.
But that often gets lost, right? And it's good to clear that up here. Yeah.
So I would definitely say that, and that could be even more clear. I do agree there.
Yeah. Happy to find that agreement there. Next point. Minimal viable.
Oh no.
So Scrum has like 1 month, right? If we can't deliver a valuable increment in 1 month, then probably what we're doing is not like if you can predict the delivery beyond that, probably don't need Scrum.
Yeah.
Minimal viable product, 2 to 6 months to MVP.
Yeah, that's that image there where it says 2 to 6 months to an MVP. That is meant to convey, and I do agree that if you look at the image, it does not say that, but it is meant to convey that on average, usually in a lot of environments, it takes 2 to 6 months to create a minimum viable product with, and that's the rest of the article then continues and describes that the idea is to get there as fast as possible, not as slow as possible. So definitely the 6 months is truly pushing it. That's
so
not
if you're
supposed to
on
happen.
enterprise level where you tend to have maybe 3 to 4 year programs, then yes, a 2 to 6 month MVP sounds.
And that's what this is designed
beautiful.
for.
Yeah.
But the idea is still to deliver value every sprint and to integrate that so to keep the system in a releasable state at all times, not just every sprint, but preferably every day.
Yeah.
And then you deliver value incrementally, which should, as fast as possible, tally up to that minimum viable product. But then the real minimum viable product, which is the minimal thing we need to deliver to learn if doing the whole thing actually makes sense. So not minimum marketable product. Now, I think that some people confuse that and then say, well, minimum marketable takes half a year. Minimum viable usually takes only a couple of weeks. So from a SAFe perspective, even though I do agree that the subtitle here in the image could be better, I do have to mention that in the rest of the article, it does clearly state that that's an average and it's not like the norm, it's not the thing they promote. What they actually promote in that article is to deliver way, way faster. That's the true sport there. So this is undoubtedly put in that framework just to get people's mind open to the idea that you could deliver faster, maybe a couple of times a year, as opposed to maybe once every 1.5 years.
Yeah. Well, that's sounds like more, better, faster, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And talk about more, better, faster.
Well, I do want to kind of touch
Yeah.
upon, it's another thing I find confusing about this image is at the bottom they have this sequence.
Uh-huh.
It has, and somewhere halfway they're connecting to the customer, right? And then after that delivering the product.
Yeah.
And then pivot or persevere, then deliver value continuously, and then at the very end, learn and adapt.
The trouble with these kinds of linear depictions of a process is that these steps take place not necessarily in this sequence, but they all take place. It's the same thing that went wrong with the interpretation of the original waterfall model, where it has like you design, build, and then deploy, and then you start maintaining. And then right below that image, it said, of course, if you do it in this order, that invites failure, and it's obviously not how you should do it.
Yeah.
But these steps are involved.
Like in a sense, it's kind of unfortunate that it's formulated in this sequential.
No, because it's really hard to draw it in a different way, and then like draw in all the possible helixes there. So a logical sequence tends to be easier to read, and then in the description it says. Of course, the business opportunity that emerges is because you're talking to a customer. So at every step of the way you talk to customers, it is just as an official step in that process that you explicitly in your process define, now I'm going to double check with the customer before I'm delivering this MVP. Is this something that would interest you? This part of checking the hypothesis behind the MVP. So these should be read as steps in your lean, in your Kanban flow, not as it has to happen in that order every single time. So these steps have checks with them that say, okay, I sense an opportunity, am I going to fund that or not? Am I going to then get a team together that does that, or am I going to give that to an Agile release train?
Yeah.
Am I going to... And at some point they have delivered some value, and I'm going to deliver that to a customer. And then I'm going to actually deliver on that MVP, or I'm going to pivot.
Well, you need but you need that inspection to be to
that's what this is meant to illustrate. Yes, it's linear, but it's not meant as has to happen always in this sequence graph. It is just, if you look at the business agility value stream that they've defined, then these steps tend to take place from A to B, right? From concept to cash.
Yes.
And then within those steps, you can have all kinds of different flows that you probably should define.
How does this map to Scrum?
In essence, if you would take different names for the steps, it almost maps perfectly. Because there you too have an idea. I think my customer wants this, so you go talk to the customer. So you sense an opportunity, and you also have
you deliver already something to the customer which they like, and then you talk to them about what else they might need or like. So the Scrum is also discover through delivery, early delivery.
But this does not exclude that, right? Because this is a cycle. So it goes back at the top. That means you've delivered something, and now you go learn from that.
So that's the okay. So it's both.
Yeah. So I honestly don't see that this is a problem.
Okay, next one. We've got, I think, one more. Runways.
Yeah, we're at emergent design.
Yes,
at
this is our
scale.
landing ground for our debate. Yeah, so of course, for each of these topics, we could probably talk all day, right? And there's so much more I wanted to share, but this is a lightning round. So on to runways. So to me, again, this is like, okay, you need a ramp up, like a sprint zero, to me, that has the same kind of connotations, right? So whether I'm right with that, thinking that or not, probably not, but I think the context that you can provide will help me think differently about this. But I was surprised first when I found runways. So how can we run away with this idea of runways?
Yeah, the key thing there is I actually prefer tracks because you have an Agile release train and they don't drive on runways. But well, in the framework, yes, they call it a runway, and it's the runway is what you create to be able to deliver features. That's the idea.
Yes.
So sometimes you need
and I agree to that extent,
some technical basis to be able to deliver functionality.
Yes.
The idea there is that usually when you get started delivering something completely new, there tends to be a little bit more work in creating that capability to even be able to deliver. And then over time, you sort of right-size that, and you are always able to deliver lots of functionality. And sometimes you also need to still tweak your ability to do so, maybe replace some parts of the system that help you do that. But the key thing there is for the architectural runway, because that's how they call it, to truly work, it needs attention. They never mention Sprint Zero, by the way. And
no, I'm just trying to give you like it has the same association in my mind.
The key thing that I say that out loud also as something that they explicitly do not mention, and they mention almost everything else. So if they wanted to include that, they would have. The Sprint Zero is not in there because you're not delivering value in Sprint Zero. So there they are completely in agreement with the larger Scrum community. You should always, every single sprint, deliver something of value. But
even if you're
initially
already,
tends to be a little bit less than down the line.
Yes, but that the same could apply when you're starting up with your early architecture, right? You can do that in an emergent way, where still after a month you deliver something of value.
Emergent architecture, yes.
Yeah. So but Safe again makes the claim it's not sufficient.
Yes.
At scale.
Yeah.
Right. And then we do see emergent architecture being applied at scale.
Yes.
Yes.
Where do you see that work sufficiently?
Well, I have personal experience, but there's, of course, we see before Save even was there, or even they introduced it. Of course, we have histories of where non-emergent architecture, of course, predetermined preset architectures were used. But we learned that that's actually not how the world works. It's so complex. Architecture needs to continuously emerge. It's in its nature of the world that we have today, and you need to constantly inspect and adapt. And you also don't want to have an oversized architecture in place and make false assumptions because you've looked into your crystal ball about thinking what you might need in the future.
I think this is truly a misunderstanding. In Safe, yes, there's a lot of attention for architecture, and yes, Safe says explicitly that emergent design at scale has limits. It runs into several problems. They describe these problems at length, and then when you read through that, it does sound like they're promoting the use of a lot of intentional architecture, big design up front. The key thing there is they only mention that because they want to avoid poor solution performance. They want to avoid unfavorable economic outcomes. But the key thing that they want to avoid is delayed time to market, because you've ended up developing a cauliflower as opposed to something you can actually deliver.
Yeah.
It's
ground for.
I need to finish my train of thought. Otherwise, I lose it. The key thing there is they're not saying you should therefore switch to intentional architecture. They're merely saying, at scale, emergent architecture requires a little bit of intentionality to balance it out, to avoid teams painting themselves into a corner, having applied 3 to 4 different frameworks where one would have been better. So the job of the architect in this case would then be, hey, I see you've selected 3 different frameworks here. Let's get together and see which one serves us best to avoid us having to maintain 3 different ones. And if then it results in a choice for 2 or maybe a 4th
contexts, because you also don't want to streamline thing out of context, right? If this particular design comes from this particular setup for their particular context, and you're and you have another design for another particular set of context, you don't want to streamline that.
And again, there's nothing in Safe that says you have to streamline.
Effective.
It is just you have to ask that question. Right, so
Safe does say a lot about streamlining and cost reductions in its motivation, economic decisions in why we want to do this. And I think that intentionality, it's also kind of like a misargument saying that intentionality is not part of emergent design. It is, of course, also part. You make architectural decisions intentionally based on inspection and adaptation continuously, right? Your architecture emerges. You have to think about the scalability of your architecture when you start out up front, of course.
Yeah.
Right. It's not saying you should just do something and then get stuck because you didn't think about the scaling things. But of course, there's intention there. It's like saying, well, it's kind of straw manning what emergent design architecture is in order to make the case again for why we need the big design.
And there, dear sir, you're exactly making my point. So we're coming the way I feel is we're coming at this from both extremes, right?
Yeah.
So from being a proponent of emergent architecture, and from, in my case, being, labeled as a proponent of intentional architecture, even though what I'm saying is, no, you should probably be somewhere in the middle. And if you take those two extremes, then yes, it sounds like a heavy debate.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can both agree that you should end up in that middle. If what you're creating is a big, complex system, then a little bit more intentionality tends to be logical.
Yeah.
But that will emerge. I do agree.
I think
with
the fear is that underlies it is that you want, like the manifesto says, you want architecture to emerge from those self-managing teams, right? The best architecture emerge.
Mm-hmm.
Then so the counter to, and that's I think where the fear comes from when we talked about architecture runways, that oh no, it's going to be some architect in some ivory tower that's going to predetermine our architecture, and we'll just have to deal with it.
I can assure you, in the safe architecture class that I teach, that's not how it's taught.
So I just want to make sure that you get the opportunity to clear that up.
Their architects are really working with the teams and with the whole organization to make sure that the emergent design doesn't emerge in all different directions, but it emerges, and then the things that emerge are looked at and choices are made, but not by the architects themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So they are not the ones making those decisions. They collaborate on making those decisions. They're mostly there to signal, we've been doing lots of work here, and it looks like we're going in that direction, which is good because that's the intent. And maybe that means that the 4 other things that we also started doing, we can rationalize that a little bit. And that would be a suggestion. At scale, teams that are working on their part of a solution usually tend to not even see that because they're looking at what's next, mostly. Now, I'm not saying there are that it's impossible to have a team figure that out for themselves, even a team of teams, but it needs a little bit of extra attention, and that is really all that SAFE is saying there.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And
thank you so much.
So I'm glad we kept each other in one piece today. Although we tackled some very challenging and difficult subjects, where much heated, and I believe that our listeners have their own ideas and thoughts on it as well. Of course, this won't be the end of it. There's of course other topics as well, like we could talk about streamlinement, guardrails. We can talk about relentless improvement versus like sustainable pace and all these topics. But I think we've covered already. Some
you have to stop somewhere.
Yeah.
I also concede that yes, you can talk for hours about the differences. I honestly feel that in the Agile community, we've veered a little bit from the discussions we should have, which is not my method is bigger than yours or better or whatever. It is, okay, so how do we avoid this problem and what options do we have there? And then essentially don't pick a framework, like pick a problem and then figure out how to solve it. Sometimes the answer will be SAFE, sometimes it'll be Scrum. Sometimes it'll be a combination of both because in a very real sense, that's what SAFE is scaling, right? So they're scaling Scrum.
Yeah.
But of course, you could do Nexus there as well, or less, or whatever other scaling framework. And I do think we should be much more looking at the problems and how we solve them that way than, attacking me because I like SAFE.
Yeah, and I guess this is, I think what I would love our viewers to at least take away from this is that, I feel that having these conversations is the right way, not by attacking each other ad hominem on LinkedIn or wherever, or, saying things like SAFE is evil or whatnot.
And just so you know, people at home, if you go look up Sjoerd's blogs, then you can definitely see that he does not particularly like SAFE. And he has written some pretty nasty posts about it. And that is exactly why we had this debate, because I do the exact opposite. I'm a fan of SAFE. Sjoerd is not. And the reason we have this webinar today is because we were fighting like we do intellectually.
Yeah.
And then we were wondering, why is nobody having these kinds of discussions? Why it's always you don't like what I like, and therefore I hate you.
Yeah.
And that's just not how it works.
And again, it's all to do with, I guess, respect for your community. Where the Agile community, the first statement in the Agile Manifesto is that we're here to help each other find better ways, to uncover better ways by doing it and doing it together. And, you know, we learn from each other, and we help each other in you know, find our way through this Agile corporate jungle, basically, which, you know, we're all part of creating as well. And we deal with complex problems. And yes, of course, I voiced my criticism on SAFe. I also have to acknowledge that after learning more about SAFe, I have to track back a little too. On some points, I'm happy that SAFe is, in its later versions, has moved to a different place. And seeing that progression, for me, that's a positive sign, right? And we keep talking, we keep being curious, right? And instead of, you know, shutting ourselves down for any, okay, SAFe is evil, I won't ever talk to anyone who's doing SAFe or whatnot.
In a complex environment,
that doesn't help.
In a complex environment, there's never just one solution.
Right.
And therefore, sometimes the solution is do both.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think it's healthy to have these discussions. What will help us best?
Yes, and again, it's also about valuing the relationship over maybe any differences in.
Now, before we chat up all the time, and totally ignore the fact that there may be some questions. Are there any questions, dear folk at home, or have you all tuned out because we were not attacking each other enough?
Yeah. Evelien, what you think? You can shout them out if you want.
There are no open questions. Answered them. A lot of compliments, and thank you for the conversations.
Oh, that's
wow.
Wonderful.
We got compliments?
Yeah.
That's unexpected. There should have been at least one awesome flame war going on there. Like, this is just lame. But no, in all seriousness, I appreciate that. So thank you very much. And, well, looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much.